Hey there, sixth graders. We're going to go ahead and apply what we learned yesterday about complex fractions to now complex unit rates. Because unfortunately, in life, we're not always handed very nice numbers. Sometimes they're going to be nasty, and when we're dealing with rates, remember, we can set them up as fractions. So sometimes when we have these nasty numbers, but we want to figure out the rate, that means we're going to have these nasty fractions that we call complex unit rates, complex fractions. So recall, a unit rate has a denominator of 1, and it's a ratio that compares quantity with two totally different units. Okay, they've got to have different units. Now remember, not all rates will have nice numbers. Does it change our process? Not at all. Remember, to convert rates into unit rates, we want to turn the denominator into 1. So how can we turn any number into 1? Well, we can divide by that number. So we will divide by the denominator. We'll divide the denominator by itself as well as the numerator. That will turn the denominator into 1. So let's do an example with some nasty numbers. Well, and actually these aren't even too terrible. Kelly bikes 4/5 of a mile in 1/3 of an hour. I want to know how many miles per hour is she riding. Now there's a couple different ways you can do this. You could use a ratio table if you would like, but I'm going to go ahead and just set this up as a rate and use now our knowledge of complex fractions. So the first thing we're going to do is set up our rate. Now remember, the units after the word per goes in the denominator. So I see miles per hour, which means miles immediately goes on the top. Hours goes on the bottom because hour came after the word per. So I've got 4/5 of a mile over 1/3 of an hour. Now again, we're going to convert our rate with a denominator of 1/3 into a unit rate by dividing by the denominator. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide the top and bottom by 1/3. Because 1/3 divided by 1/3 is 1. So let's go ahead and skip. So that's what we just did with the number 2. We're going to convert the unit rate by dividing by the denominator. Boom, we just did that right there, okay? So next, what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and write it side by side because that helps me stay a little bit more organized. So what I've got now is, 4/5 over 1/3, and I'm dividing both of these by 1/3. So what I've got up top now is 4/5, divided by 1/3. So I'm just going to rewrite that because I know 1/3 divided by 1/3 is 1. So I have 4/5 divided by 1/3. Now remember, when we're dividing fractions, it's the same thing as multiplying by the reciprocal. It is the same thing as multiplying by the reciprocal, so we're going to keep, change, flip. We're going to multiply by the what we think is reciprocal, we say reciprocal. So this is going to be 4/5 times 3 over 1. I get 12/5. 5 goes into 12 2 whole times, and there's 2 left over, 2 2/5. So what that means is she's riding, she will be able to ride 2 2/5 of a mile in 1 hour, and that would be our unit rate. Let's look at another example. So actually back to this example up top. Some of you might have noticed, well, if I have 1/3 of an hour, I need 3 sets of that to get me to my full hour. So immediately off the bat, you probably realize, hey, if I just multiply the top and bottom by 3, 1/3 times 3 gives you 1. Now, if multiplying by 3 is the same thing as dividing by 1/3, as we saw up here, dividing by 1/3 is the same thing as multiplying by 3. So if you wanted to do the shortcut and just multiply by 3 right off the bat, I'm okay with that. But let's look at an example that's a little bit more difficult and even more complex. So in 1 2/3 of an hour, Gerald can run 4 1/4 miles. How many miles per hour is he running? Again, let's set up our units first. So we have miles per hour. Hours goes on the bottom because it comes after the word per. So I've got 4 1/4 miles over 1 2/3 of an hour. So this is not as simple because now I've got mixed numbers, which makes things a little bit difficult. But I want to turn 1 2/3 into 1. I can always just divide by itself. So I'm going to divide both of these by itself. Okay, I know 1 2/3 divided by 1 2/3 is 1. So I now have 1 hour as my denominator. But now on the top, I've got a rather complex problem. So I have 1 1/4 divided by 1 2/3. So let's go ahead and do some scratch work over here. To divide mixed numbers, our first step is to turn them into improper fractions. So I'm going to go ahead and do my quote-unquote times e plus e. 4 times 4 is 16, plus 1 is 17. So this is 17/4 divided by 3 times 1 is 3, plus 2 is 5, divided by 5/3. So in order to solve dividing fraction problems, we make it easier by multiplying, keep, change, flip. So this is going to be 17/4 times 3/5. I'm going to go ahead and multiply straight across because I can't cross simplify. 30 plus 21 is 51/20. 51/20. Let's go ahead and turn that now into a mixed number. 20 goes into 50, let's see, twice, 2 whole times. That gets me to 40, which means I have 11 remaining. So that's 2 11/20 of a mile in 1 hour. So let's summarize that. So we get 2 11/20 of a mile in 1 hour. And let's see if that makes sense. So this was an hour. This was close to 2 hours. So close to double what we were trying to figure out. Close to double the amount was 4 1/4. And so we know if we're looking for just 1 hour, which is about half of this, then my distance should be about half. That's close enough to half that I'm feeling like, okay, this does make sense. So again, just to summarize, what you're going to do when you're converting unit rates, nasty unit rates, just set up your units first, and then you're going to divide by your denominator, which will probably give you some type of fraction division problem, and we solve fractions by multiplying by the reciprocal. Keep, change, flip.